All right. Well, so welcome to VO Tech Simplified Live. And I'm laughing right at the beginning because we're Donnie, my son, and I we're doing a course, and we're doing a special course on helping people find their files and get organized for because I get this tech call all the time. It's like, I can't find my files. My files are missing. And I get this so often that we're just doing a course, and we made a decision that we couldn't figure out what to price, and we just said, let's let people pick their own price. And of course, that all of a sudden creates a whole new cascade of tech stuff that we don't normally deal with. Normally, we just set a price for something and go, yeah, it's $10, it's $20, it's whatever, and that totally works. And then because we had this now, well, let's just let people set their own price. They want to pay $1, they can pay $1. They want to pay $100, they can pay $100. It created a bunch of stuff, and so we actually even sent out an email today, and then it caused issues. And thanks, Colette, letting me know about the sound. Yeah, I'm learning. Okay, I constantly get better, just like the rest of us. And so because we did something we had never done, it crashed and burned in that it did fine in his testing. And then when we went live with it, a bunch of people would have problems that we don't even know yet exactly where the issue is, but we're figuring it out. So we are going to do it. We may put it off by an extra week, but we're going to have a class because there's just so many people that just throw stuff on their desktop, or they just don't. And it's fine, because before you do audio work, before you start doing audiobooks or voiceovers or commercials or e-learning, hey, you can kind of put a Word document almost any place, and unless you're just doing hundreds of them, it doesn't matter. Once you get into audio, they all create so many files in the background, and you need folders, you need organization. So we're going to have a class on it, and it was going to be next week. I think we'll put it off one more week. We're going to get the tech working right, and then we'll move on from there. So welcome. Today we're going to talk about peaks, and of course I'm taking questions. So hey, Harry, Crail, Colette, good to see you there. All right. So yeah, but anyways, so I always find it funny. People think, oh, it's easy for you. I just think people think, oh, people that know tech are born with it, and it's like, no, it is not that way. It is that we make mistakes. We try things. They fail. And Donnie he was beside himself today. He was like, oh, this all worked in all my testing. It's like, hey, welcome to the tech world. Stuff doesn't work sometimes. And 90% of what I know these days are from trying something, having it fail, and then going back and learning, oh, I missed this. And what is sort of frustrating, and then later becomes something of a recurring theme, is when we figure out why it failed for some people. It did work for some. We got a couple orders on it. It's probably some little detail setting that we didn't know about because it's a new thing to us. So he was frustrated by it big time. I mean, and I'm just I don't want to say I was laughing about it, but I did think it was one of those things that we all go through. And anybody who's in this business, we're not in this business to figure out why it wouldn't take a special thing we wanted. We're not in the education business to figure out how to take money in a different way than we have before. But in so doing, we'll learn a bunch of things, and we'll be better for it. And we all go through the same thing. So everybody goes through it. So when you're frustrated about something, understand you're in good company. It happens to us all. We all will do it at certain points. Don't let it ruin your day. Sometimes I have to think about it, and in the shower tomorrow morning, I'll go, I know what it is. It's that we didn't check this one box that said do it this way, or we just didn't know about something, and we have to send a tech support message to the company, and we're going to do that as well. And they'll go, yeah, bozo, just go over here and check this one box, and all what you want to do will work fine. And we're just like, oh, okay, because it's the first time we've done it. So when you have that, don't stress. Think of me. Okay, my gray hair comes naturally. I have a grandfather that was gray at 35, and I was gray at 35, 100%. I'm like Santa Claus but I put a little color in my. Yeah, I know you want to know about my grooming stuff. So today we're going to talk about peaks and normalization and limiters and any other questions you have. So I see some questions coming in, and so yes, I promise you. So we will have that course, okay? And then. Oh, yeah, and I recommend gaming. So we'll talk about all these things. Cool. And failure leads to greater learning. Yes. Twin Peaks. Sorry, Bill. Yeah, well, maybe we will, but yeah, I'll save that one for later in the discussion. So I recorded a little track here. I clapped a few times, so it has some peaks, and that would be if I were working audiobooks. One of the things that I might do, by the way, while I'm recording, I don't pay any attention to peaks. It just there's no reason to. And even in the Studio One group today, someone asked a question about, hey, when I'm doing some processing, my peaks could go over 0. And it's like, yeah, they can. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about a bunch of other things. But here's the big picture. When you're using the better software, Studio One, Reaper, Audition, there's a few others that just where Pro Tools, where you have a good quality limiter, that's going to be your little gatekeeper, and it's going to take care of all sorts of problems. In the old days, what we would do is we would normalize everything. The reason we did that was because we didn't have great limiters. We didn't have great compressors. We didn't have a bunch of great tools. And you will still find some engineers that started a long time ago that are still normalizing, or they're using tools or a couple tools that don't come with their own high quality limiter, like they'll leverage the stuff from Apple, and that's fine, but it's just an okay limit. It's not as full featured as the ones where people are paying a few bucks for. They should be doing their own, but hey, they don't. Of all the things, their limiters are uh, and like everything else in life, there are absolutely spectacular limiters, and even the okay ones are pretty darn good. All right, but let's talk about that. So first thing, should we normalize? Are you going to be normal? Well, you know me. I mean, if you know me, you know the answer to that is A, no way is Don normal. So no, I don't normalize. What does normalize do? Normalize looks at this whole thing, and it is going to bring my audio either to 0 or a specific point, but it's going to look across this audio. Now, visually, you can see. Let me change the color of this because I will do something really bright maybe. Let me see if I can get bright. All right, there's brighter. So now there's bright, and you can see some peaks here. And the only reason these peaks don't go all the way to the top is I have what I call a safety limiter on my input. I do recommend people do that. Why? Because there's no value in me or you recording something and having it clip right up front, right the first time we record it. It doesn't do anything positive for us. It's all a negative. And one of the things that's not obvious is, see, right now, depending on my zoom level, right now, let me zoom in on this here. I can, not only did I zoom this in, but I can zoom in it on screen here. It looks like this little peak right here is clipping, or not clipping, but sawed off straight, which always sounds funny, by the way. The definition of clipping is when audio, when it takes it and it's like it has a pair of scissors. Oh, maybe I'm doing a haircut, and you'll see clearly this would be my haircut. Okay, I'm not using a pair of scissors. I'm gonna use my fingers. But if I were clipping the hedge or the top of my head and I wanted it to be perfectly flat, well, that would clip it off right at the and everything would be flat. Okay, obviously. All right, Captain Obvious here. Here's what happens when people see something that looks like, if I had a bunch of audio here recorded, it would look like these things are clipped off at one point, about -1. But what's really happening is when you zoom in, you will see that what a good limiter did was it did not take and saw off the tops and create flat tops. It's just that it took all these things and actually turned them down. Okay, it turned them down appropriately, and it turns them down in milliseconds, below our ability to perceive. And then once that event that would have gone over 0 is finished, it brings the audio back up. And so if there's one little peak that would have been too hot, or a bunch of peaks that are too hot, it will bring them down. It basically turn them down almost instantly. Well, in our case, it'll turn out to be instant. And then nobody can hear it when a good limiter kicks in. And here's a really dirty secret that I don't like to talk about because I'll get grief from all my engineering friends. It's that voice is actually more forgiving of clipping if it's in small amounts compared to almost anything else. It's amazing how much I could clip a voice before most people would ever notice it. Now, as a rule. We'll all tell people, don't you do that. But that's like telling your kids, don't ever speed. If they're driving, they're learning to drive, don't speed. And then, yeah, they get to be 20 or 25 or some age, probably 16 in 3 days past the time they get their license. Hey, Dad, kind of, he sometimes gets gone over the speed limit, and then they do it too. And yeah, after they learn to drive, then you learn where you can and where you can't, and still be safe. There's a bunch of little details that go on in the audio. And for example, in the S1 group, somebody said, you see, these are at -1 right now. I know that they just hit the max, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then if I apply some processing, ooh, what happens there? Well, all the good programs, I just brought these up over 0 by dragging the volume up here. So my volume just went over 0. And so it would seem like, oh no, I'm going to now have all sorts of clipping. You see how that's squared off there? The reality is that the DAWs, the better DAWs, the more advanced DAWs, all have some internal headroom available so that what looks like 0 to us, or what is labeled as 0, is not true 0. I mean, they're smart enough to go, hey, there's bozos out there like Don who may do something and it may go over 0. And as long as internally before he exports, we'll go ahead and build in and give him some guardrails. All right, we'll be nice to him. And that's just the nature of all audio production on the modern tools. You actually have some internal headroom, and you will not clip. And so if one of my effects that's applied to this would temporarily take it over, as long as, but when that effect stack is done before we export, yeah, internally it's going over (0). So it's just a little dirty secret that there's some headroom behind the scenes. But you can clip in multiple places. Your peaks can go too high. If your peaks go too high on your interface, you have that cranked up too much, hey, there's nothing our software can do directly. There is something in RX, a declipper, that will recreate some things for you and can solve some problems in an emergency. Don't do that as a norm, but it is a tool available that accidentally a recording was too hot. Then the declipper can do some amazing thing because it can figure out, oh, this is all math. There's some logic to it. Many things can be fixed with good tools, just like around the home with a pair of the right kind of pliers, the right kind of drills, the right kind of hammers. Yeah, you can fix some things around the house. You know, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to fix many things. My doorknob might need some WD-40, for example. Well, I can handle that, okay? I can take a screwdriver, something's gotten loose, I can tighten it back up. Almost anybody can do those kind of things. And the tools that are there are designed to deal with this. But here's one of the things that does happen all the time. Many people in the process are using something called normalization. What does normalize do? Normalize looks at the whole track or the selection, depending on how we're doing it, but it looks at a segment of audio. And for our purposes, we're going to talk about being the whole track, but it can do it on a segment. Most of them can do a segment by segment. And it finds the audio that's at the absolute maximum. Now, what I'm going to do is I've got a better visual of all this if we look at it in RX. So let me export this thing here. I'll export this guy. It's 12 seconds in length. And I don't even know where I put this, but I will just go ahead and let it do its thing. Boom. We've got that. I put it here. And you should have your machine. I'll talk about this in the course that I do on managing, but all your machines should be set up so that with a double click, PC or Mac, they open something that makes sense to you. And in this case, for what we're doing here, I'm going to open RX, and then we can see it. And we're going to look at it. This is rare for me, by the way. I do it when I'm doing this sort of thing, but it's not what I do usually. I'm going to switch it over to waveform view, because what we're talking about right now are these little peaks, okay? And that exported those peaks. Oh, now, one of the things you'll notice is all of these things have been brought down. I guess you may or may not notice that, but I'll point that out to you. And what's happened is my limiters kicked in and my compressor kicked in and my tools kicked in, and I actually have fully mastered audio right here. But since it's got a lot of spaces, it's a little on the quiet side. But I have these that happen to be me clapping, doing this, and they were much higher in the original. You can see them back here. There's the original. They were all higher. It was brought down by the compressor and limiter and brought down. I just happened to pull I think I have a book template there. I'm sure I do. And because of that, it came out. But what I'm going to do, let me go back. This is the joy of having a one of the more advanced saws. I just did a single click down here, and I'm going to now export that same thing, and it will give me the second copy of this. There it is. Double click. It opens here. There's the original. Okay. I just turned off my processing so that it wouldn't matter. And what you can see is right here. Look at this thing. This is a peak. Here are my claps. They're all maxed out right at the maximum, because one of the things that I have over here, I have something that I call a safety limiter. And this safety limiter was at minus 1.17. And so when I look at it over here in RX and we look at it, look at that. The sample peak on that little segment there is at minus 1.17. By the way, for our purposes, if I was doing music, I do care about true peak levels, but nobody in the, first off, in the voiceover world, no one measures that. And in the audiobook world, they're looking at sample peak levels. So if you have a great tool like RX and you have that, don't worry about it. Only worry about sample peak level. And when you're at minus 1, that gives enough headroom for things that could happen on playback devices. So that's kind of a unwritten rule that we're not talking about today. And I have a total RMS level, and I just put this out raw. Okay, so minus 27, that's pretty normal for raw. A little bit on the quiet side for me, but nonetheless. So you see these peaks here. They look like, oh no, they are what do we call it? They're clipped. It looks like it's clipped. But if I drill down enough, and I will drill down enough, let me put this guy in the middle, and let me hold it. I got to put my mouse cursor where I want it. I put my mouse cursor here, and now I'm going to drill down on that. And as I drill enough, you'll start figuring out that, look at that. Those waveforms are not actually clipped. Now, if I should have got a sample. If this was clipped, you would see right at the top, these things, let me zoom in on this so you can see that real clear, because that's kind of small on that screen. So as I zoom in, you can see right here, these are rounded off. It is not clipped. If I had truly clipped it, and as opposed to having a good limiter that kicked in, those would be flat, because there would be two samples that would be all at the same level, and you would see it, and you visually can see it. It's plain as day. And I just want you to see, that's what it looks like if you have a good limiter doing your work there. And I'll look here and see if I've got questions or comments here, but RX gives us some tools to do this. You could redraw these waveforms if you want. I'm not going to do that because that's just kind of silly. All right. So what you do is you have this thing here where you have your audio and you have peaks, and there is a process of normalization. Well, what happens there? Let me zoom out so we get to something you can see here. If I go ahead and RX does have a normalized function, so does Studio One. So virtually everything has normalized. This is such a tool that's been around for about 400 years. Since the dawn of computers. I think that's 400 years ago, plus or minus about 400 years, plus or minus about 30 years. Anyway, I can set this to any level I want, and here's the amazing thing. If I was trying to get to 3, then I'll type minus 3.5. Let's say I want to go there. It's going to look at everything, and it's going to bring down. It just brought my audio down and made it quieter. I mean, people think of normalization a lot of times. Let me undo that. Let's go ahead and gain this down. If the overall signals were minus 10, so I'm going to take 10 off of everything. Okay, this is going across that whole file. I brought everything down 10 dB. So if I had recorded that really super quiet like that, so that's fine. And then I normalize, it's going to find the highest peak. I actually have a set of them with these claps because they all happen to hit the same amount. And then it's going to bring it up. So that's fine. It'll bring it up, it'll bring it down. I'm going to undo that. But if I take just a little section and I do the same thing with normalize, it's going to bring this section up differently than it would bring this section up. They will end up at the same peak, but not the same volume in terms of perceived volume when you're listening back to them. And it just depends. If I were to take this little tiny segment here, which was quieter, and I normalize it, it's going to come up because it found the one peak within that, which is why when people normalize, it's also why I don't recommend people normalize, is because later I have to do punch-ins. And then what I have to do is micromanage everything, because this punch-in, the first time, if I normalize over the whole file, I get one answer. And then if I normalize over a subset of the file, I get another answer, which means I get audio at a different volume. And it's unnecessary. So I just never normalize anymore. I consider it kind of an old school technique, and it absolutely can work. And some people will normalize, but it's a waste of time if you have a good tool. If you combine just limiters and compressors, you can get a better sound, and you can have some things where you don't have to ever worry about going over. So I just never normalize because it's not a repeatable process. One of the differences is when you combine compressors and limiters properly, you can get to a situation where you have a repeatable process that every time you run, you run a whole chapter or a whole voiceover, and you have the right processes, you're going to get a certain level. You come in 2 days later and you record, and as long as you record the same way within the zip code of what you had done before, then when you run the same compressor limiter combination against it, you'll get the same answer again, and that new piece of audio will fit perfectly into your original audio. And like everything I ever say, if I say perfectly, there's exceptions to everything. The two words I don't like in audio are never and always. It's just I always find an exception. I never have something that doesn't have some minor exception to it. That's just life in this business. So a lot of us will generalize, hey, never allow your audio to clip. Yes, that is absolutely true. But never? I've heard some field recordings, meaning someone was not in a studio. They were recording outdoors, and there's been some clipping in it, and it was so minor that in the end, nobody knew. Should you clip on purpose? No, never. Okay? That's never on purpose, unless you were going for a distorted sound. See, there's an exception. So, but I would say, hey, never clip. You can add distortion later. There's better ways to get it, because you can't control it in the middle of it happening. So I would always be adding the same distortion afterward. If I wanted to clip it, I'd clip it all after, because that's a better way to do it. So you don't need to do it before. Don't record clipped audio. And remember, there are multiple stages. I can clip my microphone. What does that mean? If I had a trumpet here, which I can't play, I play drums. I can make sounds on instruments that are so loud that the microphone can start distorting, because I get beyond its range to handle. It's almost like if you're next to a horn from a train. If you are right next to it, our ears can only take so much before we have problems with our hearing. And it's the same with the microphone. They have each mic, each brand, each individual model has a maximum of how loud you can talk into it before it talk into it. You can put sound into it before it is going to distort. Now, most mics have a pretty high range. You could clap next to them. You can yell next to them. But there are mics that don't like that, and they're not designed for yelling into it. And by the way, you're doing voiceover, you're doing narration, you do not need to shout into a mic. I know the manuscript says she shouted or he shouted. Yeah, but if you've ever been around moms, it's my favorite example. Moms can say something to their kids, and most of us, if you've been around a mom that's upset, they can be in a public place and look down at their kids and say something with the emotion where the kids are pretty scared that, boy, it's going to be a bad day when they get home, because mom just says, don't do that. And she says it in a tone of voice she can say that very quietly and be a mom or a dad and say it quietly, and the kids understand that, whoops, we've crossed a line. She does not have to be loud about it. He does not have to be loud about it when they are explaining to their children in some situations that what they are doing is inappropriate. They can have the same emotion as me shouting at the top of my lungs, and Mike's sitting 6 inches away don't need that. We can create the feel without that. Whole different subject. Okay, so I don't normalize. You don't need to normalize. And if you are normalizing, there are almost always better ways to do what you're doing. So I'll summarize it like that. And note that all apps, include RX can do it, Studio One can do it. Well, I shouldn't say all apps. All the more advanced apps absolutely have some headroom built into them where during the processing process, if I'm applying some different things on it, I may end up having clipping. And for example, if I was over here in Studio One, I have a couple things that are going on there. It has its little closet. But for example, right at the beginning of this, I'm going to turn these things on, one click here. I add some gain. And if I start with audio right here, this tool here could add some gain. And now +6. Remember, I said this is about -1, +6. Hey, I'm going into the positive. I'm going into clipping by 5 dB. If you really thought 0 was 0, and you do the math, I can do the math. -1 +6. Hey, that's +5. That's 5 over. That's a negative. That's a distortion range. But I promise you, there's way more headroom behind the scenes for all the good DAWs. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that. Now, what I do have to worry about is when I get down to the end, my limiter had better bring things down if I'm going to export it. If I'm going to export at that point, I'm getting out of a kind of a safe sandbox that's containing all the sand. And then once I go out of that sandbox, which is all my processing, then I better be below clipping because during the process of going to a speaker or headphones, if the audio is hitting 0, then those devices will distort when they're trying to reproduce them. So that's why clipping's so bad. The devices can't reproduce it. So now let me look at questions here. You guys have been making a whole lot. And then we can, So Joya, yeah, we sorted your files last week. Cool. And then I found a Courses by Coach who talked about normalizing constantly. He's very old school for sure. Okay, yeah. First off, it was wildly popular in the past. It was something that we did and had to do before the age of better tools. My only pushback is, do you remember there was a time where everybody was on the no-fat bandwagon? That food with no fat was going to be the way we wanted to do it. Okay, and then now, coconut oil. Coconut oil was the worst back in the day. For those who are not age challenged, maybe back in the 80s or 90s, there was a bunch of food we wouldn't eat because we were told that any too much fat was what made you fat and all that. And so if you wanted to minimize, so there were a bunch of foods you wanted to minimize. Now today they're in fashion. Hey, people are drinking coconut milk. Coconut was just the worst food. And anyway, there's a lot of things at different points in time in the snapshots where they're considered good, bad, or indifferent. And then 10, 20 years later, no, the new research has come out, new ideas, better tools. So I don't blame anybody for using normalization. That was the way we did everything because it was a great tool back in the day before we had good tools that can do great limiting, compressing, and other things like that. And so we did do that. So also just know Udemy, I don't want to say that courses are bad there. There's probably some great ones. There's also some people that are just trying to make money, and maybe they're helping people. There are some good courses there, okay? There are also a lot of people that are doing it because they can make money doing it, and depending on what they know. So here's a great question. Let me highlight this here. In what way is gain... Let's put this up here. In what way is normalization different than simply increasing volume gain? Well, when I normalize something, then what it's doing is it's looking for the peak. Let me get RX up here. So let me undo all this stuff. So we get all this stuff back to where we started. If I normalize over this whole thing, turning into the gain, it ultimately applies the same amount of gain to everything, but it's how it figures out how much is based on the highest peak. RX has a cool feature in its waveform stats that when I do this, it finds the highest sample peak. That's a 1.1. And it has a little playhead right here that you can click on. And now it finds one of them, the closest one to where the cursor was. I can't remember if it goes both forward and backwards. But anyway, there's one of them. And when I zoom in on that, if you look at the little thing here, yeah, that one's right at the level that we talked about. And it's actually right down here. There it is right there. It can go high. It can be on the high side or the low side. Same thing. But point being, it finds one peak, the highest. Based on that, it decides how much gain to add or subtract. So if I'm normalizing, a lot of people, because their audio starts off really quiet, so let me zoom out again here. So if my audio starts out, and if all your audio is starting out on the quiet side, which is kind of normal, let me go find my gain tool here. Here's gain, and I'll minus 10. So if my audio is starting off quiet, it looks like normalize is always going to add some gain to it. And it found a peak and figured out the math and what it needed to add in order to get that up to 3.5. Okay, so that's cool. But let me undo that. Well, no, let me not undo that. Let me just do it here. But now if I normalize to a different value, and let's say I normalize instead, because now I brought it, let me just undo all that. It's going to bring everything down, and it's going to take this down, but it's going to take this up if I do the whole track at once. So now it brought some up, some down, and it just means it's not repeatable or reliable, because if I voice, by the way, if I voice this same line, that whatever's there, tomorrow, my peaks will be different at different levels, and they'll be on different syllables. It is highly possible that whatever I said right here, the peaks. I said the word peaks. And so that right there is peaks. And if I said the same exact sentence that tomorrow, I guarantee you that P will come out hotter or colder than the one I did today. It's just the way the voice works. And it's also the way people's pronunciation works. I can lean into my P's one day. I can shy away from it. It's the same with sibilants, by the way. Ask me how I know this, and that most of you already know that I had an accident when I was a young guy. I was 14 and have my front teeth knocked out in an accident out on some ice. Anyway, so I have fake teeth, and they've been replaced 3 times in my life. And when you do something like that, I had to learn to almost re-talk. Every time they replace them, they last 15 to 20 years at a shot. I'm 63. You can do the math. It works out that you learn. I had a lisp, and I've had a lisp. I've had excessive S's. I sounded like Daffy Duck at some points as an adult, which is really fun, by the way. It's great. All of a sudden, you get some stuff, you get it changed out, and you get to learn to talk again. So I have a lot of experience with this. And what I've learned is that you can lean into your S's. You can learn to say the same phrase with more sibilants, less sibilants, more emphasis on certain characters, less, with practice. But even when people don't practice, if you say the same line 4 or 5 times, if the emotion is slightly different, the part of the way we create emotion is we emphasize and de-emphasize, like how I de-emphasize certain syllables, certain characters, and that helps create emotion and understanding. And everybody does it all day long. You don't need to know any of that stuff. But that means that tomorrow, if you normalize this whole voice track, and you come in and record the same sentence, it'll come out a different volume. So adding gain is the same in many respects, but the way normalization works is based on one peak, the highest. And whatever the highest is, it adjusts everything else based on that. So adding gain fundamentally is the same thing. It's just how much gain do you add. If you use a gain tool, you and I decide. If I do normalize to get through, by the way, I could figure all that out. Watch this. I will undo this. I mean, so here we are right now. If I figure out and I pull up my waveform stats, I'm at minus 1.17. Well, how much gain would I have to have the peaks be at minus 3.17? See, I picked an easy number because I know if I did minus 3.5, but then I have to think about it. So if I want, by doing this over the whole file, then I get that to be right at minus 3. Okay? Oh, wait, hold it. Let me undo that. That wasn't the example I wanted. Duh. Let me get out my gain tool. My gain tool, see? Minus 3. When we do this, now it'll come out what I was expecting there, which will be minus 4.17. So I could pick a number, and I can do the math myself. And if I had undone that, let's get this, hold it, get right out here, undo, and say, let's see, let me do the math. I've got minus and this and this. Then therefore, now I'm at exactly the same number as I could have gotten, but I did the math manually, as if I had normalized to minus 3.17. So you can use gain and get the whole file down the same place. So you can. But you're going to have other things that come up later. And if we're doing voice, we end up doing pickups. We end up doing revisions. We end up doing a bunch of things. And it's really nice when you don't have to go, hey, let me go ahead and, if you just normalize this little thing, this section here, and I do this to minus 3, pick a number, now that doesn't fit. If there was supposed to be that dynamic in it, it sounds different. It sounds different than when I apply the same tools that are today, the modern tools that do it a whole lot better. All right, let me, oh, no fat is no good. We need healthy fats. So yeah, I agree with you. That's absolutely the case. And many of us have figured that out the hard way. Okay. That there is some value in some fats. And, but it still comes down to, I don't blame these people. What I blame them for, some of them, is that they don't keep up with the times or the tools, or if they're doing, some of the people doing courses are just doing courses on the cheapest DAW solutions, and they're doing it because they know that everybody will get a free program and then pay for their class, okay? Instead of when it's like, hey, if you get the better programs, then people get better results, but then they're not going to pay for their class, because who needs a class if you can have the right tools, do all the right stuff anyway? Anyway, goes both ways. So let me look at other questions and comments here to make sure I cover. Are you suggesting normalizing does not? So no. So Bill asked a great question. Let me go ahead and undo all this stuff. It is, I crack myself up, by the way. Sometimes I go for my Mac keyboard shortcuts on my PC, and sometimes I'm on my PC and go for my Mac keyboard shortcuts. If you ever see me doing undo and I get the wrong thing, it doesn't happen. It's just because I was just working on my Mac a few minutes ago, and I go back and forth, and I get the wrong keyboard shortcuts, and it cracks me up. Now, I tend to recognize it pretty quick. It's like, because they don't work. Some of them work just fine going back and forth. So the one thing about normalize is the same. So ultimately, at the end, normalize is the same thing as adding gain. It's how it calculates how much gain that normalize is going to do compared to regular gain, where we do the math and tell it how much. So gain, it's identical when it's done in terms of what it's done. So if there's a dynamic range here, but by the way, people think that if they use a good compressor, that they're squashing their dynamic range. And if it's done right, that is not the case. You'll still have dynamics in your audio. And remember, this is the odd thing that people very often, we get so ingrained with the visual of our audio, same even with the spectrogram. These are mathematical representations of our audio. They are not our audio. What does that mean? It means that as I look at this, it is not perfectly what we hear relative to this. And you can demonstrate that yourself. If you have a piece of audio where you have a syllable that's too loud. High, 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 high. Obviously I said the word high there. And if I could isolate down just the H, I get into a little section here, I can bring this peak down a bit, and nobody will know the difference. Some characters will create a peak, but they don't sound in context when they're mixed together with others. They don't sound louder. A B and a P will create a peak because there's some pressure that comes out, but in most words, pizza, the P is not emphasized unless I pizza it. But if I say pizza, in certain ways, that P is no louder than the Z's, but it visually will look louder. And it's there. Certain characters have sounds within certain frequencies, and when you add those all up, mathematically, they look louder. They don't sound louder to our ears in some combinations. So it is not such an easy thing. It's why a great compressor will will make your audio look different and meet specs and will sound great because of the way it takes advantage of the way people hear, and the better limiters, the better compressors end up looking at audio and doing things mathematically that make more sense to the way our ears work, rather than just being focused on the visuals and the specs that come out of it at the end. It's a combination. And that's where it really gets into some muddy things and some things that people just don't get about. There are tools out there that will totally meet. A perfect example. There's what is it? There was a product. I'll have to think about it. Yeah, it's not LoudMax. Now, LoudMax was designed. LoudMax is an example, but it's not the most egregious example of it. But there's a tool that a bunch of people who used Audacity used to get recommended by this guy all the time. It's not called LoudMax. If someone thinks of it, there are some things there. So there is a tool that used to basically get you into specs for ACX, and it's not LoudMax. LoudMax's not my favorite. LoudMax's not bad, but it's just okay. Sometimes I think people recommend stuff, and I just sometimes think, oh, that guy's an engineer, but he doesn't have great ears, because he would never use some of the tools that they recommend if they were totally tuned in. Now, most people aren't going to notice the difference anyway, so it's not the end of the world. So I'll cut them some slack on that. The issue is, since there are some great tools available, you'd be better off. So there were some tools, so I can't remember the name. So my other audio guy has me normalized to -3 dB. It also could be the tools that, first off, can you normalize and let me go ahead and highlight this. My other audio guy, who may or may not, is normalized to -3 dB. First off, some of it depends on what DAWs you're in. Some of the DAWs don't have the full spectrum of tools, or he likes the sound better. So he'll have there are engineers that recommend that. Now, here's what I do find. A lot of times those engineers started off doing voiceover. And in voiceover, there's a lot more wiggle room. I think audiobooks are tougher than voiceover because we have specs that have to be met. And it taught me a lot, because you have no, in a voiceover, sometimes, especially in the old days, we could eliminate breaths in a lot of situations, and we could eliminate room tone in a lot of situations. Like, you could put a gate into a lot of voiceovers, and they still would work, because we are going to have music in the background, or we're going to put ambience in the background, like a sound of an office, the sound of a park. It's going to be in a scene in a movie where there's going to be some background noise happening, or not sound, background sound happening. And so voiceover has gotten away for years with all sorts of stuff that audiobooks can't, because audiobooks are just a voice and the room, and therefore you're going to end up with something that needs to be clean, where the room tone is at the right level, not too quiet. If you're going to make a mistake, I'd rather be too quiet than too loud, but also not nothing, which you can get away with in voiceover for a lot of things because of the application at the end. So a lot of the people that start off in the voiceover world, they do recommend some techniques that they're just not best practices, but they work. And in some situations, they sound just as good because the background is there. So if I'm doing a car commercial, I can gate everything. It doesn't matter. There's going to be the sound of an engine running in the background in a car commercial. They're driving. There's going to be music in the back of it. And so by the time it's all put together, it sounds fantastic, even if I do some things that are a little questionable from a best practice point of view, if I needed 100% naked audio like an audiobook. Audiobook is tougher. You've got specs you have to meet and background that you have to meet. And to get it to be the right mix is just a tougher thing. But a lot of the commercial stuff, I mean, I've done 8,000 voiceovers and done a lot of audiobooks, 70 plus of those. But when she's doing a commercial, I know a lot of times, because sometimes I'm putting in the music with her, or she's doing it. She does 90% of it now herself, but she'll say, hey, what do you think of this one? What do you think of feel of this one? What about this? And she'll be worried about some little detail in her voice. I'm like, hey, in this application, we're putting music in there. Nobody will ever hear that little thing that you're agonizing over. It's no big deal. Just leave it and move on. Get the next one done. If we were doing an audiobook, I would say, well, no, let's take 2 seconds and let's fix that, or let's tweak that, or re-record that, or whatever needs to be done. So as far as whether people use normalize, you can use normalize and get to the same results. I don't think it's a best practice anymore when you have better tools, but which DAW you use makes a difference, and what your overall process is. And boy, I wish I could think of that utility that I really dislike. But it's not LoudMax. LoudMax, I think, is just okay. LoudMax was designed, by the way, a lot of people use LoudMax. It was not designed for voice. It is designed for musicians who are trying to get things as loud as possible and still meet a set of specs, which says you can't go over 0. You had to, back in the day, it was not designed to make the best sounding voice, okay? Now, some of the other tools that I really like, they weren't designed for voice either, but they also weren't designed to try to squash whatever you were doing and have them hit a certain set of specs but be loud. That is the, boy, I can see the logo on that thing. Equalizer, maximizer, there is one. Let's see if anybody ever got it. So there's a lot of other things. Yeah, and Twisted Wave, like they don't even have their own good limiter. Cupcake, I don't like. I mean, it's easy. Yes, it's easy, but okay. So a lot of easy things in life. McDonald's is easy. There are a lot of things that are easy, but the question is, and also, by the way, if you're using a tool like RX is as easy as any of them once you're set up, because you have a batch processor. And I was working with a narrator here the other day, and I don't know, I've got about 25 files in there. I press one thing and it's going to do everything to all 25 files at once. So how tough is that? It's drag in the files, press this once, and it's going to work, and it's processing. Right now on my machine, it'll process 23 files at once. And then once, I'm going to stop that, pause that, cancel that. I don't even know what that does to the stream. I should look at that, because I just took my stream and said, okay, I just took my processors. I should, if you really want to see something fun here. All right, we'll just go off for a second. Task Manager, bring this up, go into Performance, and I start looking at, here are my cores, and totally off message, but it'll take my cores here and it'll slam them. And probably the stream is going to get funky here for a second, and you'll see as it's working through all these and processing. Yeah, there we go. Now all my cores. I better stop that. What it does is it looks at what is available on my machine. I've got a 12-core processor here, and it will say, okay, you got that much, and it looks at what else is going on. And while it's doing that, I still can do math. I still can run like mail. I can do a lot of things all at the same time. So easy peasy. RX is one of the easiest things out there once it's set up, because once I figured out what was needed for this narrator, I press one thing and it's done for, I could do 150 chapters and let the machine do it all, and it turns out great, okay? And the quality of the fixes on some of the tools are better than others. So you can normalize. Some things are going to sound great. It's when you go back to do revisions that it creates some other things. And as long as your process is repeatable, you can make that all work. And if you're not doing long form, that can work fine too. If you're doing long form, then I recommend some other tools, but no, that'll work great. Let me look at the other things going on here. The Ultra Maximizer is good. That works well. The RX continues to amaze me. Yeah, RX is awesome. So okay, so I gotta just highlight this one. Never a complaint using Cupcake. Yeah, okay, and your booth is amazing. And so that's really the thing. So Cupcake probably doesn't have to do much. So the way I evaluate tools is how do they work at both ends of the spectrum. And some of them that are some of the best tools, they'll work on the toughest audio and they'll still sound they'll make them sound the best it possibly can be. And then when they're doing other audio, it's just like you've upgraded your booth, because the processing can be so transparent. If they can handle a tough case, then I'll trust them with my easy cases as well. So nothing wrong with that. It's just, anyway, I'll tell you about this. If I'm getting on the freeway and I'm driving one of my vehicles, it has enough, the engine is powerful enough, because I did it the other day. Let me talk about my mom's car. My mom got in an accident a couple months ago. She's fine. But she totaled her car. She is fine now. I had to get her another car. She's 85 as of this last weekend. She wanted a little red sports car. So I went out and bought her a Scion, F7, I can't remember, FS8, I think it is. Anyways, cool little sports car. Ton of power for the weight of the car. I was getting on the freeway. I was testing it to make sure it was okay to give to my mom. She wanted this cool car. And so we got it for her. And it works out that I was getting on the freeway. I glance over to my left, and there's a semi. I'm getting on. Now, I've got two options. If I'm in my normal car, I slow down and let that semi go by me because of where we were on the freeway. Because I had this cool little sports car that's just so light relative to the power it has, I just smashed the accelerator and I just got on the freeway like it was nothing, because this thing just took off like a little rocket, and it was cool. I had a blast. I mean, I'm old enough to know that, hey, sometimes I go behind, most of the time I go behind the trucks. I don't need to beat some truck on. I was just having a good time with this car, and it has a lot of power. And if you have tools that are overmatched for what you're doing, I had the choice. Do I go ahead and decelerate and go behind the truck? Or do I be a smart aleck, pretend I'm a 20-year-old again, and slam in the gas, and the car took off, and I never was in any danger, and the trucker didn't have to slow down for me because I had a vehicle that had a nice power to weight ratio. In other words, I had excess power to burn. I got to use it one time. I kind of smiled, had a good time that day. And I go, hey, that's kind of nice to have that. Now, normally I'm driving my little SUV, and if I were in that exact same situation, I would have just let off the gas and go, yeah, Mr. Trucker, you go on, and I'll just come in right behind you, and then I'll go around you on the other side. I don't have to be, I wouldn't do what I did that one day. When you have the better tools that can handle high performance needs, then when they're just idling, it's amazing how transparent they can be. So that's really, kind of my whole process there. Okay. So lots of RAM and a decent, oh yeah. So there's some other points. All right. Dun, 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 dun. I like your insight about leaving, normalizing behind. Has been able to, yeah. Said it, forget it. So Joe makes a little comment there. I agree with it. And there are a lot of good tools out there, better tools, good, better, best. First off, don't misunderstand me. People succeed using normalizing all the time. I don't recommend it anymore as a best practice. I used it back in the day. There are times for it. There are some tools that I would use it. Some tools, people use tools these days that I wouldn't use, but that's fine. And they're successful with them. I know some people that are highly successful using the most pedestrian tools. And so it's not like you need the better tools, but when you have them, you have some options similar to having a high performance car. I also could kill myself in a high performance car, I guess. I mean, I'm sure I could. I can do it, but I could do that in a low performance car. That's not the point. I want the best tools that allow me to have the best quality sound with the least amount of work, and have more automation options, so that once I get it started, then things come out better consistently with less work. And I also want tools that grow over time, that as issues come up, then cool, I can deal with them and I don't have to think about it. I have the tools. If you have RX and you have a great DAW, you have everything you need to produce world-class audio without anything else. All right. So let me go check. So I'm going to take a second here. If you have any, I'm going to be closing down here in just a minute. If you have any other questions, be sure to throw them in here. I'll get to as many as I can, and any that I can't, what we're going to do is I'm going to, when this is done, I'll write some down so I can cover them next week. Okay. So I got to go here in a few minutes here. So, I saw you recommend gaming laptops. I still love, first off, I'm not a fan of laptops overall for audio production. First off, if you move them around, I get the call. Yeah, my kid dropped the laptop. I mean, the person who, it's like your phone. You do not have to put a case on your phone. But at least, and I did that for probably the first 5 years I had a cell phone. I was a very early adopter for cell phones. And I was so proud of myself because I hadn't dropped my phone, and, my kids all had broke things. But one day, getting out of the car, it slipped out of my pocket and fell on the cement and cracked the screen. And it's like, well, okay, just proved myself wrong. Um, if you have a cell phone enough, it'll get dropped. That's the only thing that's my conclusion. It may not be your experience, but that's mine. Phones get dropped. Laptops will get dropped too. And if you don't drop them, if you have them they're sitting on a footstool. They're sitting on any kind of table. The dog will come by and if you have a cord, the dog will knock it off. A kid will knock it off. I'll knock it off. Okay. If it's there long enough, it'll get knocked off. All right. Actually, I spilled some liquid the other day on my wife's cell phone. She was really nice about it. Okay. Totally my fault. So now I'm still dealing with the aftermath of that. And if you have these things around long enough, something gets dropped. It's life. So I don't really love laptops, but so many people think that they got to have a laptop that it's like, I don't really want to fight against it, but I would recommend a desktop all day long if you can pull it off. They have better fans, and you don't have to put them in the same room. If you put them in another room and run cords in, computers do better when they're cooler. The fact that they don't have fans, everybody in our business is really happy about, because we're worried about the sound. I'm also worried about the longevity and the upgradability. And if you have fans, computer components just last longer. So you trade off. I'd rather have a desktop whenever I can. They're expandable. I can have higher performance fans without worrying about it, and I will take a desktop all day long over a laptop. Okay? But laptops can be silent, and people aren't worried about, and that's their major concern. And if people take them and I want to edit by the pool, fantastic. But note, guaranteed, one day you'll be carrying it and you'll trip over the dog and that thing. So have your backups in place. You're trading off one thing for another, and that's cool as long as you understand the issues. So yeah, Harry, I would always, if I can use a desktop, I will. And I like having a remote where I have wireless keyboard, wireless mouse, and a wire in for the monitor, wire in for the mic. My interface can be by the computer. I don't need that on my desktop. That's the ultimate situation to make that happen. So i7 14th gen, man, those are killer. If you can get one of those, Harry, 14th gen. If you can get anything over about 12th gen, you're doing fantastic for those i7s. Those are really good. Failure learns to greater learning. Yeah, I've failed a lot. So Mike, I'm probably the number one failing. And Twin Peaks, I'm not covering this week, Bill. We'll save that one for another day. Yeah, right. So let me check out some things here. Yep. So by the way, yeah. So Harry, definitely what you're talking about here, where you're talking about 14th gen i7, that'll kick butt. It'll kick butt. It'll work every other day. In an ideal world, yes, you have a lot of RAM. That's a win. And I do the CO1 maximizer. Yeah. By the way, the better DAWs have built-in tools that you don't need to go to third parties, and your audio can sound fantastic. Some people go ahead and use a less expensive DAW, and then they buy or acquire a bunch of other tools, and that can work too. So there's no one path. I like having my vendors responsible. Like I just like having my vendors responsible for their own stuff. As soon as you add plugins and third-party stuff, now you have two people to point fingers at. Least when something isn't working here, I go yell at Isotope about that. But boy, definitely can work really, really well. Yeah, happy birthday, my mom. I can't believe she's 85. I'll get a picture next week of her car because it's pretty spectacular. I've got it on my phone, and I'll get the right model number. It's a Scion. It's a little rocket. It's fun. I notice that both voice to noise and dehum add a bunch of very low-end crud. Should I care? No, and that's dependent. So all audio processing alters your audio. What most of them, dither is a perfect example of that. Dither, so one, if it's in the low end, and watch, you can see it in the low end here. If I take this and let me take a tool, I'll just use voice denoise and I'll run that. It does bring some stuff down in there, but yeah, you can run a high pass, but can it be heard is the big question. You see a bunch of that. There's this whole bizarre thing. Before I knew about the visual tools, there's a bunch of things I would hear and you didn't have any visualization for it. And then later it's like, that's what I've been hearing all these years. That's really cool. I can see it now. So it teaches us some things back and forth. But there are some things now that I used to get hung up on, hey, look at this right now. There's some noise right here. And then I measure it and I go, well, that's at minus 74. Minus 74 is pretty darn good. But look at how it looks visually. So if somebody is weirded out, they might go ahead and do something like this, where they go, oh, look at all that, and they black it out, and that's horrible. But it's totally worse than that other, quote, noise that was there. Because if I magnify, if I put a magnifying glass or put my finger under a microscope, one of the worst things, if you ever see those pictures, I've never done it, but I remember seeing when I was a kid in class, they had a video, or it wasn't even video back in the day, they had film, and they had a microscope on somebody's eyelash, and they had magnified it so many times that there was a bunch of creepy crawly stuff on the eyelashes, and they go, yeah, well, this is on everybody. I don't think us little kids slept for the next 6 weeks because we found out that there's creepy crawly bugs, I don't know what they're called, bacteria, I don't know. There's little things that crawl around on our eyelashes. They're little bacteria, I think, whatever they are. Don, the biologist, should go find a new job. But they're on our skin, they're on our eyelashes, they're in our hair, they're all over. It's part of life. But when they get magnified, they're scary stuff. Okay, you ever seen a fly up close? I mean, some of them look really amazing. There's a lot of insects that with a close-up look kind of menacing. And then you find out, yeah, but their little mouthy things are so small that we'd never know it. And it's the same with the noise. All right, so I'll leave that. And then dun, 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 iStope as a production suite, RX10 for $19. I don't think so, Joya. Maybe it does, but there might be an educational version of it, but for $19, and the version of RX10 for $19 is probably Elements, which is a subset, and that subset does not have all the things that we would want for voice. It's this subset here. It's missing voice denoise. I'll bet if you look at it close, you're going to find out that that's a subset. Those are only plugins. They're not in the interface. So it's not the same. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just different. And, they have a subscription. Yes, so a subscription, $19 a month. But so that's a different thing. Okay, so yes. My mistake, though. You're talking about their subscription program. Yes, they have that. But $19 a month, rounded up to $20 a month, times 12, then it is a certain amount per year. That's fine. But that's a great way to get started with stuff. And then you buy it later and easier. And yep. So hope you guys are having a fantastic day. I'm trying to do the best I can to make sure, and I think I got almost most of them. Okay. So next week, if you have a question, if you have a comment, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Of course, you need to like the channel, the thing that's helpful. And then next week, wait till you hear on the Heller Baarns thing that we've got. I have a killer guest next week. We're talking voiceover, a voiceover guy who is just world class, amazing. And that's next week on the Heller Baarns show. And then we'll do tech next Tuesday, same time, same station. So be sure to join us then. Tell your friends. I look forward to seeing you. If I did miss your question, be sure to either send me a private message so that I add it in for next week. A lot of good tools out there. got a lot of good fun stuff coming up. I'm excited. So look forward to seeing you on the wires. You have a fantastic day. I appreciate you being here. We'll talk to you later. Bye.